And finally, I think this is pretty cool, and maybe you will too. Gerald Brisco worked for WWE for many years. As a wrestler, he was a road agent, a talent scout, he was a local promoter. I mean, this all dates back to the early 80s. And he was one of the Vince McMahon's right-hand men, and he has kept a lot of items over all of these years. Some people just throw away all their stuff, their memorabilia and everything. They didn't know, like these days, they can make so much money off that stuff. So imagine all the guys with their gear and old belts and all kinds of stuff that they could have held on to. They could have made a fucking fortune off that stuff. So many of that stuff is lost to time, and so many of that stuff was thrown away. It's like those promoters that, and I think Jerry Jarrett used to do this, these promoters that would tape their weekly shows like in their territory and use those same tapes and just record over the old shows to tape the new ones. So a lot of those shows are not available anymore. Now, if they would have had the foresight to know that one day they'd be able to make a lot of money off those tapes, they wouldn't have recorded over them. Well, Gerald Brisco, he kept a lot of his stuff from over the years. Old programs, magazines, run sheets, that sort of thing. And over the past week or so, he's been posting a lot of it on his Twitter page. Not that he's giving it away, he's just posting pictures of it. His handle, by the way, is @FGBrisco if you want to go follow him. And there were a few things that jumped out at me that I thought I would share because you may find this as interesting as I do. So, for instance, he posted a letter sent by Vince McMahon to all company talent dated January 4th, 1985. This was just 2 months before the first WrestleMania. And it reads as follows. As was last year's custom, all wrestlers and managers that work under the WWF banner are required to sign contracts. Those of you who were with us last year have obviously suffered no ill effects of such signing. As has been custom for 3 generations, this office has maintained an acute sense of fairness and integrity. Since all of you have had ample opportunity to review our standard contract, we must ask for immediate acceptance or rejection. Those of you rejecting the contract will be deemed to have given this office a 4-week notice of leaving. Those of you accepting the contract will undoubtedly live happily ever after, along with me, in fairyland. Remember that today is just another day in paradise. Please return the signed contract signifying your acceptance or the unsigned contract signifying rejection and notice to the appropriate agent tonight, who will issue last week's paycheck. This office has maintained an acute sense of fairness and integrity. I wonder if Wendy Richter felt that way the previous year. I love that if you sign the contract, you will undoubtedly live happily ever after with me in fairyland. You'd have to be living in fairyland to believe that. But if you were someone who rejected the contract and then WrestleMania happened 2 months later, I could see how that might have ended up being a bad business decision. So then he posted a WrestleMania 4 sheet with the tournament bracket for the World Championship tournament. And like at the top, it's got contact information for their director of media relations at the time. And it's got a contact for the public relations manager for Trump Plaza. All the names on the sheet are printed for the opening round, right, in the bracket. Plus you have Hogan against Andre in the quarterfinal round because those two got an automatic bye into the next round. And Brisco wrote in pencil the results or the planned results of the tournament. So you can see where he wrote in, like elsewhere on the sheet, he wrote in like 6-man tag with the Bulldogs and the Islanders, and he wrote in IC title match with Honky Tonk Man and Brutus Beefcake. In the tournament bracket itself, above each opening round match, he wrote in, I assume this was before it even happened, what the planned finish, what the planned result was going to be. So he wrote in like pin, DQ, and he wrote in the results to each subsequent round. And what caught my eye about this was when he gets to the Ricky Steamboat Greg Valentine match, the winner of that match, which ended up being Greg Valentine, met Macho Man Randy Savage in the next round. And it was such a missed opportunity to, run that match back, Savage and Steamboat, this time with Savage going over. All of the matches in the tournament were very short, though. I mean, so they wouldn't have gotten the time that they had at WrestleMania 3 to go out there and have a classic or anything. But Savage Steamboat would have been a hell of a lot better than Savage and Valentine. I'm not saying Valentine was a bad wrestler, but I'm just saying Savage and Steamboat sounds much more attractive as a match. But he wrote Steamboat's name in as the one advancing to the next round, only to cross it out, and he wrote Greg in right above his name. Which means that the original plan may well have been for Steamboat to advance to the next round to face Savage. I never knew that. So I wonder what changed. Unless this was just Brisco fantasy booking his own tournament, and then as it played out, he simply crossed out the wrong results and wrote the right ones in. But I'm just, in the role that he would have been in behind the scenes at the time, I would imagine in his position, he would have known what the plan was, and he filled out the bracket accordingly. But it's interesting to think that Ricky may have been planned to win that match, and maybe that day it got changed, right? Which is too bad. He also wrote Bam Bam Bigelow into the next round with a win over One Man Gang in the opener, but Gang ended up winning that match. And so Bam Bam is crossed out in the next round, and he wrote Gang above his name. And he also had Rick Rude going over on Jake the Snake Roberts. So it would have been Rick Rude against Bam Bam in the next round, with Rude going over and wrestling Randy Savage in the semifinals. And then Savage wins, and we get what we got with Savage against DiBiase in the final. So we could have had Randy Savage against Ricky Steamboat and Randy Savage against Rick Rude in the tournament on the same night, according to this. That would have made for a better tournament. But again, there were so many matches because they did the entire thing in one night. It's, 16-man bracket. It's not as if they would have gotten a whole lot of time. But it's fascinating to see what the original plan may have been here. And he also shared like so many things, but this is the last one I'll mention here. He shared a newspaper clipping from the Tampa Tribune dated New Year's Day, 1991. In a story titled, Drug Charges Fell Wrestling Manager. It says, Raymond Bobby the Brain Heenan, a manager with the World Wrestling Federation, was arrested on drug charges Monday after passing out aboard a flight bound for Tampa International Airport. Heenan, of 1505 Kyle Court in Valrico, which, well, that's very encouraging. They just put it all out there. Here you go. You want to knock on his door and say hello. There you go. It says Heenan was charged with possession of marijuana and possession of drug paraphernalia, according to an arrest affidavit. He was released from the Hillsborough County Jail on $3,000 bail. The 46-year-old wrestler turned manager was a passenger on Northwest Airlines Flight 475 from Detroit that arrived in Tampa at 10:50 a.m., according to Lieutenant James Clem of the Airport Police Department. Northwest spokeswoman Christy Clapp said that Heenan passed out as the flight was making its approach. The flight crew was unable to revive him, so emergency crews were called before it landed. Heenan was taken to St. Joseph's Hospital after airport police and rescue workers found him unconscious in his seat aboard the airliner. At the hospital, he was still unconscious, so we kept his bags for him while he was there, said Clem. Doctors from St. Joseph's then called airport police, asking them to check Heenan's luggage for any medication that he may have been taking. During the search, police found 48 grams of marijuana, 2 pipes containing marijuana residue, and a pipe tool. After being treated and released from the hospital, Heenan returned to the airport at 3 p.m. to pick up his luggage. He was then arrested. Heenan wrestled and managed in the American Wrestling Association in the 1970s. He retired, but he returned to manage wrestlers in the WWF. Hospital officials would not say what Heenan, who could not be reached for comment, was treated for. I don't think I ever knew about this story. In checking the Observer from the following week, in 1991, this is what Meltzer reported at the time. Bobby Heenan was arrested on Tuesday, one day after he collapsed on an airplane coming home for New Year's. Heenan was coming home to Tampa from Detroit when he passed out just as the plane was landing. Airport police found him unconscious and rushed him to St. Joseph's Hospital. With his heartbeat down near 35 beats per minute, the doctors asked police to check his luggage, and they found 48 grams of marijuana and 2 pipes containing marijuana resin. After Heenan regained consciousness and was released from the hospital, he was arrested, when he went to claim his baggage. And according to the story in the Tampa Tribune, Heenan did not appear surprised and was very cooperative when police arrested him and charged him. Heenan went back on tour without missing any scheduled appearances for a Thursday night show in Tucson. Because of the storyline in Heenan's current house show program with Big Boss Man is that if he fails to appear, he will be suspended for life by the WWF. Heenan was not pulled from any shows immediately. To the best of my knowledge, with the exception of the Tampa Tribune newspaper, the incident did not make any press until this past weekend when on Sunday it went out over the wires and was picked up in Monday newspapers all over the country. I knew that Bobby smoked years later because Jim Ross told the story on his podcast, this was years ago, about smoking weed with Bobby the Brain in the WWF because Bobby would get very upset. You'll find this funny. Bobby apparently would get very upset and worked up over some of the booking back then. This would have been like his last year or two in the company before he went to WCW. So he was just announcing at that point. He might have been doing some producing backstage also, but he was announcing. He wasn't managing anymore. And JR said that Bobby was old school. So him having to make sense out of gimmicks like Repo Man and then go out and talk about them when they would do their voiceovers, it made him crazy. Right? They were just so ridiculous. So they had a code word, which was, or two words, I guess, which was chocolate cake. And so when Bobby would ask if JR's wife was making some chocolate cake, he knew what he meant. And they would go off to go smoke and calm down before they did their voiceovers for Wrestling Challenge or whatever show they were doing. Because back then, you couldn't smoke marijuana. Like it was absolutely prohibited. You would get fined. You could get suspended. They had all the heat on them from the steroid stuff and everything, and they had a drug policy back in the late 80s for cocaine because it was just so out of control. But they would not let the boys, smoke marijuana, which is not to say that they didn't, but if you got caught with it, you would get in trouble. And that's probably what drove a lot of them to drink. And so now they're taking pills and they're drinking, whereas if they were smoking marijuana, it makes you wonder how many of those wrestlers might still be alive today. But that was the policy back then. I think Bret Hart has talked about that too, how, you can't smoke weed, because he also smoked weed. Can't smoke weed, and so what did the boys do? They did more drinking, right? Or if they didn't drink, now they drank. And, drinking and taking pills is not a good combination. But there you go. If you didn't know, now you know. JR and Bobby Heenan, they had I almost said a safe word. Holy shit. No, they had a secret, oh my God. They had a secret code word. They had a secret code word, which is very different from a safe word.